Last week I was on vacation and I read an incredible book, an incredible novel. And I think I've annoyed my friends and family because I've talked about it so much. It's by an author named Alan Levi, and the book is called Theo of Golden. Theo of Golden. And I kind of fanboyed out a little bit. I actually went to his website and I sent him a lengthy message saying how much I loved the book. It's probably a little embarrassing. He hasn't emailed me back yet. He might be creeped out by me, but I just want him to know who I am. Theo of Golden tells the story of a mysterious 85-year-old man who moves to a small town in Georgia called Golden. And one day he stumbles into a coffee shop and he sees close to 100 portraits hanging on the walls. They're created by a local artist named Asher, and they're portraits of people who come to the coffee shop, people in the city. And Theo has this idea. He makes it his mission to purchase one by one these portraits and give them as gifts to their subjects. And so he'll purchase the portraits, and he'll write a handwritten letter to them and say, "Hey, I'm not a stalker. I'm a harmless 85-year-old man, but I want to give you a gift. I want to give you a portrait of yourself. Meet me in the center of town on a bench by the fountain." And people will come. Some are curious, some are a little nervous, but they'll sit next to him on this bench. And he'll pull out the portrait. And he'll say, "Oh, this is a beautiful portrait. I feel like it captures such personality." And then he'll detail what he sees in that portrait. He'll say, I see strength. I see courage. I see kindness. I see pain. I see a little bit of fear. And he essentially invites that person in to tell their stories. And he'll ask questions. He'll lean in. He'll actively listen to them. And they might sit there for 30 minutes, for 45 minutes, for an hour. But a profound change will come over that person. And they'll walk away feeling seen. Not just looked at, but truly seen. And at the end of the conversation, when Theo hands them their portrait, he'll always say, "I see the potential for you to be a saint." I don't want to spoil the story, but throughout the book you learn that Theo is compelled by his faith to meet these people, to see these people. He sees them in some ways as God sees them. Today we're talking about the image of God, this theological concept, the idea that every human being was created to reflect God's nature. We're all important. We're all valuable. And I think what makes Theo's story and that entire novel special is it runs against the grain of our current cultural moment. A few years ago, researchers at Harvard Graduate School, they asked 10,000 middle school and high school students about their parents. They said, "Do your parents care more about their career or more about others and being kind?" And 80% of them, 80% of these middle school and high school kids said, "My parents care more about their achievements than others." We're creating a culture that values what people can do over who they are. But what if we saw people the way that Theo sees them? What if we saw people the way that God sees them? We look past status, achievement, money, and we saw the divine fingerprints on their portrait. And I was thinking about this message, and one of the issues or struggles that comes with a sermon like this is everybody's heard about the image of God, or they have some idea of it. And I think most of us, we nod our heads. We say, oh, yes, of course. We're all made in the image of God. We're all valuable. But the thing that keeps me up at night is if I truly actually live that out. That if you were to ask the people closest to me, if you were to ask my kids, would they be a part of that 80% that says, oh, yeah, they say that. Wade says that. But he actually cares more about his achievements than other people. Do you have this gnawing feeling that maybe you don't see people the way Theo does, the way God does? Maybe this feeling that one day your children or the people around you will say you cared more about your career than others. Perhaps you'll be reading through Scripture and you'll come across passages that talk about caring for the widow, the orphan, the poor, and it makes you really nervous and uneasy. And you get over that unease by trying to explain away all of those texts. Or you try to make excuses as to why you're already fulfilling them or you don't have to fulfill them. Perhaps, maybe you don't have a problem seeing the image of God in other people, but maybe you have a problem seeing the image of God in yourself. Maybe the greatest gift someone could ever give you is just to sit down with you and see you. Today we're going to be talking about the image of God as we continue our series through Genesis. I appreciate Justin reading the text. Something we have to understand about the context of Genesis 1 and 2 is that in most ancient creation accounts, creation is not the byproduct of divine intention. In fact, it's the byproduct of warfare and violence. Gods will clash, and as a result, the world will take shape. Biological life will emerge through chaos, through conflict. There really is no meaning to it all. But Genesis actually would have stood out in Near Eastern culture because it's the opposite. Creation tells a different story, one of intentional design, one of purpose. And then at the pinnacle of all of that, God brings forth his most prized creation, humanity, made in his image. In chapter 1, verse 26, you just heard it, God says, let us make mankind in our image according to our likeness. So circle those words in your mind. Image, likeness. What do they mean? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? Well, if you look at Scripture, we learn that God is God's Spirit. So being made in his image doesn't mean we physically look like him. But yet we're like him in some ways. Notice what comes next. The author makes this distinction between the animal world and humanity. They're separate. Notice what he says to humans. Rule, subdue. In the next chapter, there's even that word, cultivate. There's a biblical scholar, his name's Derek Kidner, and he makes this really fascinating observation about the text between animals and human beings. He says, only man is set apart and given a job description, given a role. We were given a role. God created us to represent him on earth. Think of being given a priceless object or a piece of land to farm or to forest. What does that require of us? How do we do that? Well, it involves logic, creativity, problem-solving skills, morality. Wise, good choices must be made. God gives us those attributes so we could take care of creation. You reflect God's image when you use your ability to think wisely, when you make good choices, when you act in ways that show love, kindness, and wisdom. When you solve problems, show compassion, act with integrity, you represent God's nature to the world. That's one aspect of what it means to be made in the image of God. But yet we move on, and there's this huge emphasis on Adam and Eve's relationship. As Christians, we talk about the Trinity. God is three, but one. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And it might seem like a far-off idea, but it actually has huge implications even for this text. Before God created the world, he is a relational being. And he made us relational. Relational, so we can have a relationship with him, but also we can create deep relationships with other people. That's what we were made for. And when you feel disconnected from others, you'll often find that there's a piece that's missing because we weren't created to be disconnected from those around us. That's a distinction between the animal world, between us. We have this special purpose. So when you think about the image of God, think of your hands, the role we've been given to bring order to the world. Think of your heart, the call to care for others and to foster relationships. And think of your head or your mind, the value that we and others hold because we possess some of God's quality. We will never reach the heights of God. We'll never be as good as him, but we can make good choices. We'll never be as wise as him, but we can make wise choices. We'll never have the power of creation like him, but we can cultivate what he's given us. We were made in his image, and with his help, we can represent him to the world around us. I recently came across a quote from an author named Yuval Harari. He wrote a best-selling book called Sapiens, very, very popular. If you go into Barnes & Noble, if you go into a store at the airport, it'll oftentimes be presented or placed at the very front. It was a hit. And he made this quote. Harari is not an individual who believes in a personal God. He says, human rights are just like heaven and like God. It's just a fictional story that we've invented and spread around. It may be a very nice story. It may be a very attractive story we want to believe. But it's just a story. It's not reality. It's not biological reality. Just as jellyfish and woodpeckers and ostriches have no rights, Homo sapiens have no rights. Take a human. Cut them open, look inside. You find their blood and you find their heart and lungs and kidneys. But you don't find there any rights. The only place you find rights is in the fictional stories that humans have invented and spread around. And what we see from Harari is that he's taking the logical conclusion that the universe is random. And if the universe is random, well, the idea that all of us have dignity and have worth, it's just an idea. And if the evolutionary route took a different turn, our idea of worth and morality would look differently. There's no basis to it. I think when we hear a quote like that, even if we're not Christians, there's something inside of us that resists it. Why? Because we look into the eyes of a child, of a baby, we look into the eyes of those around us, and we see something. We see the image of God, and we know deep down that all of us have worth. There are a lot of reasons to believe in a personal God, and a loving God, and the Christian God. And one of those is the idea that we understand right and wrong. We understand worth and dignity. And that comes from somewhere. Where does it come from? Not a universe created by chaos, but a universe that's been designed by God. We can be his representatives. In my study, I came across this fascinating illustration. In ancient times, many emperors, they would actually order for statues to be created of themselves and placed across the empire in the remote places. And the idea is that if a person came along and they would see that statue, they would understand who rules and reigns over that territory. I think this is a great illustration of how God has placed humanity as living symbols of himself to represent his reign. We can represent God to those around us. We learn about the first human beings being in the Garden of Eden and this idea of them cultivating it and spreading and subduing the earth. Think about what that means. They were to take the Garden of Eden and turn the whole world into that. God allowed them to be a part of his creation process. We can be a part of his creation process. Being made in the image of God means we have an invitation to represent the creator of the universe in our daily lives. And we can do this in a number of ways. The first way we do this is by working to cultivate and care for God's word. Working to cultivate and care for God's world. I love how Timothy Keller describes it. He says, we are called to stand in for God here in the world, exercising stewardship over the rest of creation in his place as vice regents or vice rulers. We share in doing the things that God has done in creation, bringing order out of chaos, creatively building a civilization out of the material of physical and human nature, caring for all that God has made. This is a major part of what we were created to be. In our work, we are called to bring order out of chaos, to build with what God has given us. Now, you'll learn soon as we go through Genesis that the first human beings, instead of being God's representatives, they said, I want to be God. Sin entered the world. And as a result, work is a lot harder than God meant it to be. But our work is an opportunity to create meaning and purpose in the world, to bring order to chaos. There are probably some of you here, and you're thinking about your job, and you're thinking about your work, and you realize that you're not bringing any meaning or purpose to the world. You're not really bringing order to God's creation. And it's possible maybe you need to make a change. But I would argue that for most of us here today, the job we have is an opportunity for you to be a representative of God on earth. But it takes a change in perspective. A few years ago, my family and I, we were traveling. We were coming home from camping. We were traveling in West Texas. And I was towing an older pop-up camper with my truck. And we were in the middle of nowhere. And I hear the tire pop. And I get out and I realize the tire actually really didn't pop. It exploded. And the tread went into my camper and actually bent up pieces of it. So I actually couldn't change the tire because if I put a new tire on, then it would just shred the old one, or shred the new one. And so it's a very stressful situation. And I'm calling around, and there's a small town not far from where we're at, and I find there's this tire shop, and it's Keith's Tire Shop, okay? Keith's Tire Shop. And I'm calling him, and he's like, yeah, we'll get you fixed up. It'll be great, no problems at all. And so we're driving there. I'm going very, very slow, and it's a very stressful situation. Cars are honking at me. I have a shredded tire. I'm not sure where they think I'm going, but they're honking at me. It's great, though. Me and my wife, we didn't argue at all. It was perfect. We were just chilling the whole time. It was great. And I love it because my kids, right, we are stressed. We don't know how we're going to get home. And my kids are in the back watching TV like, where's Cheetos? I got to go to the bathroom. And so I'm searching. I end up calling Keith like 2 times. I'm trying to find his tire shop. And eventually we see it. We see the sign. And we're driving, but there's really no place to park with a camper. So we just pull around the side of the building, and there's this gravel patch. So we park there, and there's a shop. And this guy comes out, he's kind of looking at us, and he approaches me. And I say, hey, I'm so sorry. It took us a while to get here. We were driving slow. We got lost. Here's our tire. And he looks at it, and he looks at me, and he says, well, let's bring her in. Let's look at it. So he starts working, and he's like welding. He's like bending metal. He's doing all these things I don't know the name of because I don't know how to do those things. And he's working on it. And I look at him, I say, man, Keith, I really appreciate it. Like, you're helping us. And he goes, I'm not Keith. And so at first I was like, okay, maybe I got his name wrong, but I'm like, no, it's Keith's like tire shop. I said, you're not Keith. He goes, no, I'm Ken. Keith's a crook. And so come to find out, Keith is like the town crook. He's like, man, he takes advantage of people. And he's like, when you pulled around, you actually pulled away from his shop. And then I just have a body shop. I'm not a mechanic. I've got a body shop, but I can fix this. And he fixes this up, helps us to where we can get on the road and get home and then get it repaired later. And as we were leaving, I said, hey, what do I owe you? You know, you worked on this for like 45 minutes. We were really in a bind. And he said, you know what? It's totally cool. I've got my own business here. I'm just happy to help. I'm just glad you didn't go to Keith. That guy's a crook. I'm going to tell you something cheesy, okay? But I got to do it. I can't help myself. In life, you can either be a Keith or you can be a Ken. Amen. And that's the message today, folks. You have an opportunity in your work, right, to not just draw a salary, but to create places of meaning and purpose. You might be a teacher, an accountant, a plumber, a service worker. You might know how to create a mean Microsoft Excel document. I mean, it's got all the formulas in it. You can cultivate, bring order out of chaos, building up a civilization of what God has created. Jonathan Pennington says that we as Christians are called to re-green the gray world. I love that phrase. Re-green the gray world. Ask yourself tomorrow morning, how can I serve others today? Be excellent in the work that you produce. As Christians, our work should be excellent. Follow through on your commitments. Push your employees to give their best work and to take accountability for their responsibilities. As Christians, we should be known for creating great products and great systems. In addition, as Christians, we should be known for creating great art because we have a relationship with the Creator. As Christians, we should not be scared of science. Studying the world that God has created, producing technical innovations is a part of cultivating the things that God has given us. I saw this interesting slide on Wesley Huff's website. I want to show it to you. It's a diagram of the last 100 years of Nobel Prize winners. And you'll notice on here, a majority of those individuals are Christians. And this isn't to say Christians are smarter than everybody else. But it shows us that we as Christians are called to cultivate what God has given us. And that overflows in the literature that we create and the science that we discover, the science that we learn about. Do you do that in your work? We may not be the smartest, but may people look at us and say they care for the people, they care for their work, and they take care of what God has given us. They take care of creation. I think we put environmental care in this strange sort of political compartment. And I know sometimes it's difficult to try to take care of the environment while also taking care of people, and difficult choices must be made. But as Christians, the command to care for the world around us is important. It's commanded by God. So hands, we have a role to play. our heart. We were created for relationships. We must treat others like they are made in God's image. In our society, oftentimes we elevate the young, the beautiful, the talented, and we push everyone else to the side. May we be a church that brings those people that the world has cast out to the center of all that we do. As Christians, we must love and serve individuals living with disabilities. This is a place where they are welcomed, where they are affirmed, where they are loved. As Christians, we must support families with neurodivergent children. We understand, we acknowledge the unique challenges faced by families, and we serve them. We reflect God's love and affirm the divine image present in every person. May we bring those people to the center. May we serve those families. What about immigrants and refugees? You know, it's okay to disagree with others on how to best serve refugees and immigrants, while also not putting others in harm's way. But so often we can descend into hate and be pushed into these categories. We stand up for immigrants and refugees and we get called a Marxist. On the opposite side, we say that abortion is wrong and we're called an extremist. Don't let society dictate how you understand the image of God. To reiterate, we can also disagree with someone and their choices. We can speak the truth. We can say the Bible doesn't agree with this life, but we can still love. Sometimes we feel like we have to choose. We don't have to choose between truth and love. We can do both. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. As Christians, we serve people from the womb to the tomb, the unborn and the elderly. People at the beginning of their life, people at the end. They are made in the image of God, and we are called to serve them. Technology can be great, but one of the worries of technology, one of the fears that I have is technology oftentimes obscures the image of God. We get on social media, and the people we interact with are not individuals, they're just images, they're avatars. We can't let technology keep us from seeing the image of God and others. We stand up for the vulnerable. We fight against racism. Isaiah 1:17 says, "Learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, obtain justice for the orphan, plead the widow's case." So how do we do this? We all believe it, or hopefully we believe it, but how do we actually live that out? Sometimes it feels overwhelming. Here's my first piece of advice. Change the aura of your life. Change the aura of your life. David Brooks, the writer, says, "We all create microcultures around us by the way we lead our lives and the vibes we send out to those around us." What is your microculture? A few years ago, I was traveling in Yosemite National Park with some friends, and we were riding bikes along a creek. And it was sunny, and it was hot, and I was sweating, and we paused for a moment, and I was exploring the creek, and I decided I could cross the creek by jumping from different stones, from stone to stone, and then crawling across a log. So I get to the other side, and there's brush, there's trees, and I kind of have to push through that to get to this trail. And there's a canopy of trees over this trail. And I've never experienced anything like it before. It was as if the temperature dropped by 10 to 15 degrees. There was a cool breeze. And I called up, I said, "Hey, come over. I found where they filmed Lord of the Rings. This is Rivendell. It's right here." We all have a microculture. Have you ever hung out with someone and you walk away feeling refreshed? And it's not like they don't challenge you, because good friends challenge each other. It's not that they don't correct you, because sometimes it happens, but you walk away and it's almost as if you can tell they see the image of God in you. Have you ever hung out with a group of friends and you said, oh, it's just so great? There's an aura, there's a microculture there. Have you ever done the opposite? You hang out with someone and you feel worse about yourself. They draw out all your insecurities. You hang out with a group, they feel worse about yourself. What kind of microculture do you create with the least of these? With the people around you? How do we create a microculture of Christian grace and love? Just a few ideas. Practice deep listening. Truly listening. Ask meaningful questions. I need to do a better job of this, but I heard recently, and I think it's true, the idea that if you're talking to someone one-on-one, it's almost impossible to go too deep. People actually want to talk about their childhood, their parents. They want to talk about their history, their faith. Sometimes it's impossible to go too deep. Do we ask those questions? What experiences shaped your views on this? What has been a pivotal moment in your life? Do we practice empathy to the least of these? Do we see people as unique individuals rather than stereotypes? Do we center conversations on others? Are we curious about others? Do we celebrate the successes of others? Like in that book, do we sit beside others and hear their stories and truly see who they are? The people around us, but also the people the world casts away. We can apply the image of God to our lives by changing the way we treat, understand, and listen to others. We also need to be actively involved in caring for those people the world often forgets. So we're kind and we treat people with love and we invite them, but we also attack the systems that degrade the humanity of the people around us. And we build a culture that supports those who are often forgotten, the people around us. I was thinking about that in our church. I feel like our church is filled with individuals who live out the image of God in ways that many don't realize. People in our area. And I'm going to name some people from our church. And I said this in first service. I didn't get their permission at all, okay? But there's nothing they can do to stop me now. I'll ask for forgiveness later. Sean and Janelle Mills. Sean's always out there directing traffic. It could be 30 degrees, it could be 100 degrees. He's always there. His wife Janelle has dedicated her professional life to serving children as an occupational therapist. She's one of the reasons that our children's department has a sensory room, ensuring that all children have a safe and comfortable space to enjoy service. Devin Baker, here at the church, he spearheads many of our service projects. He's passionate, he's committed to helping the homeless. 10 years ago, Justin, he was just up here reading the passage. He started a business. For the last 10 years, we've worked together. At the very beginning, Justin was committed to using our profits to help others. Last year in 2024, we gave over $60,000. He gave over $60,000 of profit in the business to churches and charities. And what's amazing is one of those charities is a food bank that served his family when he was a child. In the area, I actually have a friend, his name is Van. Van competes in endurance sports, so triathlons, marathons, races. And he's involved in an organization called Ainsley's Angels. If you've competed in triathlons, if you're a part of that world in that area, you might know Van by his nickname, the Speedo Bambito, after his colorful Speedos. Van is an awesome guy. When I was doing a race in April, it was tough. It did not go well. I'd finished, but it didn't go well, and he ran by me for the last couple of miles. He's a great guy. He's involved in this organization called Ainsley's Angels, and they are committed to helping runners push riders across the finish line. People, regardless of their ability, experiencing the thrill of crossing a finish line. And so he's teamed up with a young man named Hunter, and they've completed marathons and triathlons. People that wouldn't be able to do it on their own. And Van would be the first person to say that he gains more strength from Hunter than Hunter gains from him. But I'm in awe of his sacrifice. Think about it. Somebody's like, hey, run a marathon. You're like, no, thank you. Run a marathon while helping someone else cross the finish line. The sacrifice that goes into that. The long hours of training. And then, I'm going to mention my wife. My wife, Priscilla, wasn't here first service, so I got away with it. I don't know if she would be happy with me sharing this, but I'm going to YOLO it and just say it anyway. I joke with my wife, and I tell her spiritual gift is giving vacations to people who need it. Over the years, she's helped many, many people go on vacations. Just recently, she spent her time, money, her talent as a photographer to send a family struggling with cancer to Disney for free. I have friends and acquaintances who serve immigrants, who minister to single mothers at the local pregnancy assistance center, who have fostered and adopted children, many in this church, who coordinate prison ministries. I know person after person who's carefully cared for an elderly parent, spouse, and relative when it wasn't easy. Here's what I would encourage you to do. We can't save the entire world. You can't help every single person or group that I've talked about. You can create that invitational aura or that microculture, but when it comes to attacking the systems, here's what I would tell you to do. Dedicate your life to one or two issues, or dedicate the season of your life to one or two things, and say, I'm going to impact, I'm going to show the image of God in these areas. It could be something that we learned about from these individuals here at the church or in the area. What cause will you devote your life to? May the world know Christ because of our sermons and our service, because of our words and because of our actions. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. He says, there are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, they are all mortal, and their life to ours is as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. You have never met an ordinary person. Every person that you have locked eyes with is an immortal, created in the image of God. We have a role. We're built for relationships. We're valuable. We must see the image of God in others. And we also must see the image of God in ourselves. As a pastor and teacher, I feel like my responsibility is to teach you the Bible. And then there's this second part. It's the applicational part. And sometimes this can be a little objective. I've got to say, okay, how do we take this truth, bridge that gap of thousands of years, and how does it work in our lives today? I was praying about this message, and I felt like there were a few applicational points that I needed to discuss. Two in particular. Self-harm and suicide. I'm going to briefly talk about these two things. If this is something you need to walk out or take a child, I completely understand. Self-harm and thoughts of suicide, they're more prevalent than we realize. Between 2007 and 2019, the suicide rate for people in their early 20s rose by 41%. The highest group at risk is younger men between 20 to 29. It's also especially deadly for those, both men and women, in middle age. About a year and a half ago, a friend and a mentor of mine ended his life. And it impacted me and countless other people in many, many ways. And I feel like it's my job to try to check on the people that I know, but also let people know that these thoughts that other people are better off without you, it's just not right. And if that's something you struggle with today, whether it is self-harm or suicide, I want you to know that you're valuable. That you are made in the image of God, and those lies are not true. And I can't emphasize that enough. I also realize for people who are suffering this, just a sermon it might not change much. But here's what I want to tell you. If there's just a moment of clarity that you have, the Holy Spirit just kind of touches you for a moment. Here's what I want you to do if that's you. I want you to talk to somebody about it. That's your application point. I don't expect you to just walk out and be like, yay, everything's fine because I heard a sermon by this lanky guy named Wade. Talk to somebody about it. Know that you are worth talking to somebody about it. I was discussing this with a counselor in our church, Ashton, and discussing this with my sister-in-law, who's a counselor, Jessica. They gave me a couple different ideas. You can always call the Suicide and Crisis Hotline or Lifeline at 988. So it's 988. I would also encourage you to text a friend or talk to your parents. A simple message, something as simple as, hey, this is hard for me to say, but I've had these thoughts. I need someone to talk to. If you just open the door a little bit, just a little bit by a text, it can change your entire life. There's also a website called Mosaics of Mercy. I'll say it again. Mosaics of Mercy. So you can type in something you're wrestling with. You can type in your insurance, and they'll pair you with local therapists. So once again, that's Mosaics of Mercy. In our area, my sister-in-law works at a counseling center called True North. True North. And they offer, if you'd like it, faith-based counseling for you, for your children, for your teenagers. You're worth asking for help. And I'll say this. Parents, if a teenager comes to you, friends, if someone comes to you and talks about self-harm or suicide, treat them with love and respect. Know that it is really hard for them to do that. That's a risk. Help them to see the image of God. And it's not easy. It's not something that can always be solved in a day. Be there consistently. Create that microculture where people can come and they can share those feelings with you. You are valuable. You are made in the image of God. How do I know this? Because of the cross. You know, God didn't just tell us that we were valuable. He showed it in the most powerful way possible. As Christians, we talk a lot about Jesus coming to earth. I mentioned before that instead of representing God, at times in our life we said, no, I am God. I'm going to live like I am all that matters. And that has separated us from the most important relationship possible, that with our Creator. And what Jesus has come to do is to take on that so that we could know God again. And that's the cross. I was reading Fleming Rutledge. She talks about crucifixion, the cross. She says, crucifixion as a means of execution in the Roman Empire had its express purpose the elimination of victims from consideration as members of the human race. Elimination from the human race. Rome crucified individuals, and they said, you are not human. You're less than human. You're something else. What did Jesus do? He took on that inhumanity to show us what true humanity is. He showed us our value by being devalued in the eyes of the world. And he absorbed that inhumanity, all those things, those lies, the sin that would separate us from God, and he destroyed it through his resurrection. He exploded it from the inside. God loves you. You have worth. The cross reveals this. I've talked a lot in this message about doing. Do this, do that, do this. In Christianity, there are things we have to do, but we do it because of what Christ has already done. His grace fuels us. When we look at the cross, we know that Christ sacrificed so we can sacrifice too. And so today it's not about earning the image of God or earning forgiveness. It's about looking at what Jesus has already done. And I pray that as you think about this message, you would think about one or two things that you should do differently. And as your fuel, you look to the cross, you look to the resurrection of Jesus. We can spread the message of the image of God by sacrificing, because Jesus sacrificed for us first.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's message on our Wake Church YouTube channel. I pray that this was an encouragement to you and that you are challenged to grow deeper in your faith. If this message has encouraged you, do us a favor and go ahead and share it with a friend. And make sure to subscribe to this channel for more weekly content just like this, and you'll be notified when we go live on Sunday mornings. Lastly, we want to say thank you for your generosity. If you'd like to support our mission, you could go to wakechurch.com/give or simply click on the give button on the screen. Thanks again for tuning in. We love you.